They were the justice system's power couple, elegant, accomplished, admired. But behind their polished smiles and public accolades, a deadly secret was festering. One that would shatter everything. It started with a simple, seemingly harmless affair, but it quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. Loretta Denise Fairbanks, Chief Judge of Summit County, had always been revered for her impeccable judgment in the courtroom, but in her own home, the rules no longer applied. Her husband, Deshaun, a successful real estate mogul, had no idea that the woman he loved, and the woman who had built her career on upholding the law, was slowly plotting his demise. One night, as the moonlight cast a pale glow over their luxurious mansion, the unthinkable happened. Deshaun's screams echoed through the house, but they were silenced by the cold, calculating resolve of Loretta. When the police arrived, they found his body locked away in a freezer, his blood still staining the floor where he had fought for his life, his face frozen in a mask of shock. And standing in the shadows, Loretta, calm, composed, and covered in his blood. What drove her to kill the man she once called her soulmate? How did the woman who swore to uphold justice become the very person who betrayed it? Before we dive into this harrowing case, like this video and subscribe for more stories that expose the chilling truths behind love, control, and betrayal. Loretta Denise Fairbanks was the embodiment of black excellence in Ohio's justice system. The first black female chief judge in Summit County, her rise to power was a testament to both her brilliant legal mind and unwavering dedication to justice. In the courtroom, she was a force to be reckoned with, stern yet fair, respected by her peers and feared by the criminals who stood before her. Her every decision, though often contentious, was grounded in her moral authority, and she carried herself with a grace that commanded respect. Off the bench, she was just as formidable, a captivating speaker invited to prestigious HBCUs and women's empowerment events, where her words stirred the hearts of aspiring leaders. To the public, she was the very definition of success, a role model for young women, particularly young black women, who dreamed of breaking barriers. Her husband, Deshaun Lamont Fairbanks, seemed to be the perfect complement to Loretta's fierce intellect and formidable presence. Deshaun was a real estate mogul whose charm and charisma could light up any room. He knew how to connect with people, from barbershop owners to city council members, using his warmth and easy smile to win them over. Where Loretta was composed, Deshaun was disarming, his laugh infectious and his stories captivating. Together, they were the epitome of a power couple, two individuals who had overcome their humble beginnings to build an empire. Their marriage, spanning over 20 years, was a public display of mutual respect and unwavering support. They were inseparable, their bond unbreakable, or so it seemed. Their names were synonymous with success, and in Akron, they were celebrated as royalty, black royalty, no less. Their images graced the covers of magazines, their presence was a fixture at gala dinners and church events, and their story was one of triumph over adversity. From the outside, they had it all: wealth, influence, a perfect family, and a perfect life. But beneath the surface, behind the smiling faces and well-crafted public image, there were cracks. The life they presented to the world, so polished and pristine, was nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, concealing a darkness that would soon come to light. And as it always happens when secrets grow too heavy to bear, the truth would tear apart everything they had built. Their perfect world was about to collapse, and no one, least of all Loretta and Deshaun, could have predicted just how devastating the unraveling would be. Loretta Denise Fairbanks had always been the picture of righteousness in the public eye, her every move calculated to reinforce the image of a woman who stood firm in her convictions. But beneath the polished exterior of the first black female chief judge in Summit County, a secret desire festered, one that had little to do with fame, power, or even the law she had spent a lifetime mastering. Loretta's obsession wasn't with control in the courtroom, but with something far more dangerous: youth. Mark-Angelil Gaines was just 26 when he first caught her eye. He was everything Loretta wasn't supposed to be interested in: young, street-smart, and newly reformed after serving time in prison. He had enrolled in a summer internship program for formerly incarcerated youth, a program Loretta had championed as part of her efforts to help underserved communities. At first, it had been nothing more than a mentoring relationship, a chance to steer a young man away from a life of crime. But as the weeks passed, Loretta found herself drawn to him in a way that went far beyond the mentor-mentee dynamic. There was something about Markin, his swagger, his cocky grin, the way he moved with a confidence that was a stark contrast to the calm authority she exuded, that captivated her. Their meetings, initially focused on his future, soon took a different turn. Loretta started offering him more than just advice. Expensive gifts, private dinners at upscale restaurants, and promises of a glowing recommendation for law school became the bait, drawing Markin deeper into her web. She encouraged him to lean on her for guidance, whispering about future opportunities she could provide him. It wasn't long before their relationship crossed a line, one that Loretta had carefully constructed in her mind to ensure no one would ever suspect her. But what started as a calculated manipulation soon spiraled into something much darker, something more dangerous. Late-night texts, burner phones, encrypted messages, and hotel rooms booked under fake names. Loretta risked everything, her career, her reputation, and her marriage, to keep Markin close. Their encounters were fueled by an insatiable need that Loretta couldn't control, a desire that blurred the lines between power and submission. She no longer saw Markin as just an intern or a protégé, but as someone who filled a void in her that she had never acknowledged. Each stolen moment with him pushed her deeper into a twisted cycle of obsession. Deshawn began to notice the subtle changes in Loretta. The late nights, the unexplained phone calls, the increasing distance between them. He wasn't a fool, he knew his wife, knew her habits, and he wasn't blind to the small, seemingly insignificant details that didn't add up. Loretta had always been punctual, always kept a tight schedule, and her late nights at the office had been predictable and professional. But now, there was an erratic energy about her. She would disappear for hours, her phone glued to her hand, and when she returned, she seemed distracted, her thoughts elsewhere. At first, he brushed it off, attributing her behavior to the pressures of her job. But as time went on, Deshawn couldn't shake the growing unease in his chest. He confronted her, once, twice, even 3 times, but Loretta always denied any wrongdoing. She laughed it off, assuring him that his suspicions were nothing more than the product of his overactive imagination. She was the same woman he had married, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. And yet, Deshawn's gut told him something was wrong. It wasn't until one night, while she was in the shower, that Deshawn's suspicions were confirmed. He had noticed Loretta's hidden phone, an old, cheap model tucked away at the back of the drawer in their bedroom. It wasn't like her to keep anything from him, especially not a phone, and that alone set off alarms in his mind. With shaking hands, he unlocked the device, scrolling through the messages and photos it contained. What he found made his stomach turn. Text after text, video after video, all documenting Loretta's secret life with Markin. The texts were graphic, explicit, and there was no mistaking the intimacy between them. One voice note in particular stood out, a recording of Loretta moaning Markin's name, urging him to say it again. Judge who? It was a chilling reminder that the woman he had trusted, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him in the most intimate of ways. Deshawn stood there in the dark, holding the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. The reality of it hit him like a ton of bricks. Loretta had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The life they had built, the image they had crafted for the world to see, was all a lie. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair, it was about the complete destruction of everything they had stood for, everything they had built together. The evening of June 17th began like any other, with the warm scent of oak wine barrels hanging in the air, the soft clink of glass echoing in the dimly lit wine cellar. But tonight, Deshawn's steps were heavier, his heart a thudding drum in his chest. He had prepared himself for this moment, the confrontation that would shatter the facade they had carefully built together. In his hand, he clutched printed screenshots, messages, and a recording of the voice note that had exposed everything. Loretta stood across from him, her arms crossed, her expression calm at first, as if trying to maintain the semblance of control. But the silence between them was thick with the weight of what had been uncovered. Deshawn didn't waste any time. He threw the evidence on the polished wooden table between them. You think this robe gone save you when they hear what you've been doing with that boy? Deshawn's voice was low, each word filled with venom. You think you can just hide this and keep living your life like nothing happened? The color drained from Loretta's face as she took in the reality of her husband's discovery. Her eyes darted to the evidence, her pulse quickening. The foundation of her life, the life she had worked so hard to build, was crumbling before her eyes. She took a step back, her breath shallow, and in that moment, it was as if she could feel the weight of all her lies pressing down on her chest. Deshawn, please, she stammered, her voice shaky. But she didn't know where to start. Words failed her, and the fear of losing everything, her career, her reputation, her legacy, tore through her. She tried to compose herself, but panic twisted her insides. You don't understand. You're trying to ruin me. Don't you see what this will do? What it'll do to us? Deshawn's eyes burned with rage. You ruined it, Loretta. You ruined everything. You think you can just destroy our lives and walk away like it's nothing? Loretta's breath came quicker, her anger now bubbling up, fueling the panic that clouded her judgment. You don't get it. You don't know what it's like to be under the microscope all the time, to be perfect all the time, to be the one people look up to. You think you can just tear me down with your accusations? She was no longer pleading, but lashing out, her voice rising as she stepped toward him. Deshawn's words had cut deeper than she could have anticipated, and with that sting, a wave of fury took over her. She shoved him, hard, sending him stumbling backward. The force caught him off guard, but before he could regain his footing, Loretta grabbed a wine glass from the table and hurled it at his head. The sharp sound of shattering glass rang out in the cellar, but Deshawn wasn't fazed. His fury only deepened. Is this what you've become, Loretta? He demanded. Is this who you really are? She was beyond reasoning now, her emotions swirling out of control. In a frenzy of rage, Loretta reached for the nearest object she could find. A marble gavel sculpture that had been awarded to her at a judicial ceremony. She swung it violently toward Deshawn's head. The heavy object collided with his temple, sending a jolt of pain through his skull. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world around him spun. Deshawn staggered, his vision blurred from the blow. His head throbbed, but the adrenaline coursing through him only made the anger sharper. He could feel his pulse racing as he stood there, his body shaking with a mix of disbelief and rage. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his entire life, had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. She stood before him, panting, her chest heaving with exertion, a wild, desperate look in her eyes. The silence in the room was deafening, but in that silence, everything had already been said. The years of trust and partnership, the carefully constructed image of perfection they had built together, had all been shattered in an instant. The reality of Loretta's betrayal, her lies, her secret life, hung between them like a dark cloud that could never be erased. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the knowledge that nothing could ever be the same. Deshawn's mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of exposing her to the world, to the court, to their entire community. He could feel the weight of that decision pressing down on him. But in that moment, all he could do was stand there, blood dripping from his temple, and stare at the woman who had once been everything to him, his wife, his partner, his equal. Now, she was just the woman who had destroyed it all. Deshawn's collapse was sudden and jarring. The weight of his body hit the cold stone floor with a dull thud, and in the haze of pain, he barely managed to whisper her name, his voice barely a breath. Loretta. His eyes flickered as the world around him began to fade. The blood flowing from the gash in his head was pooling beneath him, a red stain spreading across the floor, but Loretta, her hands shaking from adrenaline and fury, was beyond reason. She stood over him, her breath shallow and erratic, her hands still gripping the marble gavel. But she didn't stop. Loretta's world had narrowed to a singular point of obsession, an overwhelming compulsion to erase the evidence of her betrayal, the only thing that stood between her and the total collapse of her life. With each strike, each blow, she broke him more, until, finally, his breath stilled. The finality of it hit her all at once. Deshaun Fairbanks, the man who had stood beside her for over 20 years, was gone. In the silence that followed, she felt a coldness seeping into her bones. She looked at his motionless body, the violent act she had just committed, and for a moment, she couldn't comprehend what she had done. Her breath quickened, panic surging. But in her desperation, her mind scrambled for the only option she could think of. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling, and dialed Markin. His voice was calm when he answered, the same casual tone as always, but when she told him what had happened, there was no shock in his response, no hesitation, just a cool, methodical agreement. Markin was there in 35 minutes, his demeanor surprisingly unfazed by the blood-soaked reality that awaited him. He was used to chaos, to desperation, and Loretta's frantic call fit neatly into the world he had come to know. Together, they worked quickly. The task at hand was grim, but to Loretta, there was no alternative. They wrapped Deshaun's body tightly in 5 layers of thick, industrial plastic, each layer cold and sterile, a symbol of the life she had taken and now sought to erase. They cleaned the blood with bleach and ammonia, the strong chemicals mixing in the air, the stench sharp and biting. It was a process they had rehearsed in their minds, a cold, calculated series of steps, each one taking them further from the life they had known and deeper into a nightmare of their own making. When the work was done, they sealed Deshaun's body inside an industrial freezer in the soundproofed room beneath the wine cellar. The room, once designed to preserve the vintage wines Loretta had so carefully cultivated, now became a tomb. The freezer, cold and impersonal, held not just the remains of Deshaun Fairbanks, but the remnants of a life, a marriage, and a future that Loretta had destroyed with a single violent act. Above ground, the world continued as usual. The guests at their parties, the churchgoers who adored Loretta, the colleagues who praised her from the bench, all remained unaware of the dark secret buried just below their feet. But for Loretta, the weight of it would never truly leave. She would live with the horror of what she had done, but in the quietest parts of her mind, she convinced herself that it had been necessary. For Markin. For her own future. For the preservation of everything she had fought so hard to build. But not everyone was willing to let things slide so easily. Keisha Fairbanks, Deshaun's 28-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, had always been close to her father. He had been her protector, her sounding board, the one person who had never failed her. So when Loretta called to say that Deshaun had left after an argument and moved to Detroit, Keisha didn't buy it. Her father would never just disappear, not without telling her, not without a word. It didn't add up. Keisha began asking questions, digging into Loretta's version of events. Her suspicion grew as she realized there were no signs of Deshaun's departure, no belongings missing, no goodbye texts or phone calls. His Rolex, his truck, even his wallet, all of it was still at the house. It wasn't like him to just vanish, and the more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was terribly wrong. Keisha took matters into her own hands. She filed a missing persons report, determined to get answers. But as she soon discovered, the weight of Loretta's influence was not easily ignored. The case was dismissed quietly, with little investigation or follow-up. A missing persons report that should have been the beginning of a search was instead met with indifference. The police, it seemed, had already made up their minds. They trusted Loretta, the chief judge, and her carefully crafted narrative. But Keisha was not easily deterred. The grief she felt for her missing father was turning into something darker, a growing suspicion that would not let go. She couldn't understand why the authorities weren't taking her father's disappearance seriously, why her father's life was so easily dismissed, as though he didn't matter. Something was wrong. She just didn't know yet how deep the lies ran. 7 months after Deshaun's disappearance, an anonymous tip came in that would shatter the lives of everyone involved. It came through a burner phone, a cold, clipped voice delivering one simple sentence: check the freezer. She killed him. The call was short, the words heavy with accusation, but it was enough to spark the investigation that had remained dormant for too long. Police acted swiftly, obtaining a warrant and moving in on the Fairbanks estate. The house, once a symbol of prestige and respect, was now a scene of horror waiting to be uncovered. They made their way to the basement, a place Loretta had kept locked away from prying eyes. The room that had once stored wine now held the remnants of a life gone wrong. As they pried open the freezer, the smell hit them first, an overwhelming stench of rot and decay. But it wasn't until the lid was fully opened that the true nature of the crime became apparent. The scene inside was nothing short of grisly. The body of Deshaun Fairbanks, wrapped tightly in plastic, lay at the bottom, frozen in time but marred by blood. The room was a macabre picture of disarray, duct tape, zip ties, and the faint remnants of bleach and ammonia, evidence of a hasty attempt to cover. Life had been stolen from him in a violent, calculated way, and now his body would serve as proof of the twisted act that had unfolded behind closed doors. The news broke within hours. Chief Judge Loretta Fairbanks, once revered for her role in the justice system, was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband, Deshaun. Her carefully constructed life, built on years of hard work and public admiration, was crumbling before the world's eyes. Her face, once a symbol of integrity, now splashed across every major news outlet. The media exploded with coverage, and the story spread like wildfire. People were stunned. Supporters who had once looked up to her, who had cheered her on as the first black female chief judge in Summit County, now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about her. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse where she had once presided, their chants echoing through the streets. Some demanded justice for Deshaun, while others questioned how a woman in a position of such power could have fallen so far. They marched, they screamed, they demanded answers, and in the chaos of the media frenzy, the public's perception of Loretta shifted. She went from being a revered figure to a symbol of betrayal, corruption, and abuse of power. But it wasn't just the media storm that would condemn Loretta. Investigators uncovered damning evidence that painted a clear picture of her guilt. Deleted voice notes and text messages, once thought to be lost forever, were recovered from Loretta's phone. The messages revealed the full extent of her affair with Markin, the passionate, manipulative relationship that had driven her to the edge. One voice note stood out above the rest, a recording of Loretta, her voice low and trembling, whispering a chilling confession: "He was going to destroy me. I had no choice." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the toxic power dynamics that had fueled this tragic turn of events. Loretta's words painted a portrait of desperation, a woman who felt cornered by her own actions, trapped by the consequences of a life lived in secrecy and manipulation. She had convinced herself that her affair with Markin, her betrayal of Deshaun, had been justified, that there was no way out but violence. Her fear of losing everything, of seeing her carefully curated life disintegrate, had driven her to commit an unimaginable crime. As the investigation continued, the public debate over Loretta's actions grew more heated. Some labeled her a predator, a woman who had exploited her position of power to prey on a vulnerable young man. They saw her as a master manipulator, using her status to conceal her desires and maintain control over the people around her. Others, however, viewed Loretta as a product of a broken system, one that had shielded her from scrutiny for too long. They argued that the pressures placed on black women in positions of power had created an environment where Loretta had no choice but to act out of fear, out of a need to protect herself from a society that demanded perfection from women of her stature. The debate raged on, dissecting every aspect of her life, her affair, and her marriage. The question of power, control, and abuse lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the toxic environment that had enabled Loretta's actions. But no matter how the public chose to interpret her actions, the reality was clear: Loretta Fairbanks, the woman once hailed as a paragon of justice, had become a symbol of its failure. And the damage she had caused, both to her family and to the people who had trusted her, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Loretta's arrest on charges of first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice sent shockwaves through the community. Her trial, along with Markin's, became a media circus, with every detail of their twisted affair and betrayal laid bare for the world to see. Loretta's defense of temporary insanity, claiming Deschamps' abuse and her act of self-defense, was a last-ditch effort to salvage any semblance of control over her narrative. But the jury saw through it. Kiasha, Deschamps' heartbroken daughter, took the stand, her voice trembling but strong. Her testimony about her father's love and loyalty, coupled with her deep mistrust of Loretta, struck a chord with the jury. When she said, "My daddy didn't run," she froze him like leftovers. Her words became a rallying cry for those who saw Loretta's actions as nothing short of monstrous. Her grief was palpable, and it painted a stark picture of the man Loretta had coldly discarded. In the end, the jury found Loretta guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a devastating end to the once promising career of the woman who had been so revered. Markin, who had helped cover up the murder, was sentenced to 18 years after cutting a deal to testify against Loretta. Their fates were sealed, and the public's thirst for justice was momentarily quenched. But for Kiasha and the rest of Deschamps' family, no verdict could undo the devastation left in Loretta's wake. This is a story of obsession, power, and the horrifying cost of silence. Loretta Fairbanks, a woman who once embodied the ideals of justice, saw her world crumble under the weight of her own forbidden desires. She rose to the highest ranks, only to descend into the very pit she had spent her career judging others from. Deschamps Fairbanks, a man whose heart was full of love and loyalty, found himself betrayed by the one person he trusted most, becoming the coldest secret ever kept. Do you think Loretta would have confessed if the body hadn't been found? How far would she have gone to protect the legacy she built at such a great cost? If this case chilled you, like and subscribe for more true stories exploring the darkest intersections of power, secrets, and betrayal.